Morning, everyone. I just want to express my gratitude to the chaplain and everyone who was involved in inviting me this morning. It's a great, great privilege. My name is Muhia Karianjahi, and I invite you to say that very fast, several times over. And I am a Kenyan. I was taught by my wife to introduce myself by relationships. So my wife, Marcy, is seated right there, and she's waving, all right? And we have two sons who would fit right in this crowd. One is a sophomore, unfortunately not here, and the other one is a gap year student at Honey Rock. And please pray with me that he comes to Wheaton, because I really would like that. It would be really good for him. I serve at Honey Rock, the Outdoor Center for Leadership Development of Wheaton College. And I invite you all, if you have not come up to Honey Rock at least once for a summer, man, you have no idea what you're missing, the development that happens there. And I oversee, I coordinate the Outdoor and Adventure Leadership Master's Program there. So I live up in northern Wisconsin. I do not look like a guy who lives in the Northwoods. Can you imagine me with a cheese head? I don't have a beard. I do not ski. I don't have a snowmobile. I cower in the cold. But I love it. I love being up there for a season. Temporariness of being out there is wonderful. And I'll be talking about temporariness today. What I am is a Kenyan. And let me just boast for a while, because being a Kenyan has been really cool the last month or so. So if you remember, just over a month ago, the marathon running barrier of 2 hours was broken by Eliud Kipchoge. That was a wonderful day for Kenyans all over the world. We waved our flags, and as though that were not enough, the very following day, the women's marathon record was broken by Bridget Koskei. It had been held by Paula Radcliffe for 16 years, and she broke it in the Chicago Marathon. And just about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 2 Kenyans blew away the New York Marathon. So, running is the Kenyan thing. And so I thought, look at me. Do I look like a runner? Don't answer that. But I thought it would be a good idea to run a marathon, because you're a Kenyan, that's what you do, right? And 2013, when I was a student here, I was a master's student here, I signed up for the Chicago Marathon. And I'll tell you, I loved it. I loved the 18 weeks of training. At least, life had thawed off, and I was not running in the snow. I had a wonderful and painful time running the marathon. The camaraderie was amazing. So we were set in corrals for those who have run marathons, and they tell you, what speed do you think you'll be running? And you sort of get into this corral with absolute strangers, and you tend to run with them at the same speed. I won't tell you what my intended speed was. And you tend to run with them at the same speed, and then you get to about the halfway line, and the men and the boys start separating themselves. But the moment I'll never forget was over the halfway line, I found these absolute strangers loving each other, holding hands, and they were humming at the top of their voices, Chariots of Fire. And I looked up, and there was a huge screen. We are halfway, and there was the Kenyan receiving his check, having finished the marathon. He was done. And I was really tempted from then on, if I were ever to run a marathon, to put on a big sign that says, "The Other Kenyan." So I really wanted to replay that again. It was one of the best experiences of my life, painful as it was. And I really wanted to get back to it again. But I haven't been able to do that. I've never been able to train for 18 weeks and to prepare for another marathon. It's one of those things that I now recognize was a temporary experience. And over the years, I've gotten accessories in my knees that are titanium and other parts of my body falling apart, and I just know that I'm not going to run another marathon, and I take it for what it is. And I wonder if you have places like that, really, really sweet experiences that you have, and you wish they could last. Maybe it's a vacation, and you look forward to the vacations, and maybe they happen more than once. Maybe it's a road trip that you like doing. It could be sports events. You go there and there's a temporariness to it, there's a camaraderie, there's this sense of community that you wish could last. For some of you, that could even be church and small groups in church. And I actually think, if you think of temporariness in terms of years, being here at Wheaton may be one of those things. It's awesome to be a student here. I've experienced it. Or it could be something like meal times at Saga and getting to the story, and it's coming to an end because you have to take off for class. Last night, I had the privilege of speaking delivering a lecture, and the reception was so wonderful. I wished it could last forever. But it has to come to an end. Part of the allure of those experiences that come and go, that are good, is their temporariness. They can be really wonderful times, and we can actually begin worshiping and idolizing those experiences. On the other hand, for some people, the temporariness can be a disillusionment. You can start thinking, why engage if it's all going to come to an end? And when you do that, you could miss something that would be of great, great value. So today's lectionary reading, Psalm 121, I think talks about one such place. It's about Jerusalem. And I suspect you've been in the series of Psalms, the Psalms of Ascent. There are 15 of them. And these are the psalms that the Israelites sang as they were going up to Jerusalem. They were required to go there for 3 big feasts. One would be the Passover. That was a week of partying up at Jerusalem. Those Feast of Weeks basically go up from wherever you are in Israel and get to Jerusalem for a 1-day celebration. And then there was the Festival of Shelters. They clearly looked forward to them. Now allow me to share what God might teach us about ascending to these temporary places for short periods of time. So Psalm 121 begins, and I'm reading in a different version from what the chaplain used. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. I look up to the mountains, and it says in the NLT, does my help come from there? Does it come from the mountain? So the spoiler alert, that is the key question for today. Is that where my help comes from? It's a good question because Jerusalem in those days was it. That was where it was. Psalm 122, just sneaking into that a little bit, talks about Jerusalem. It says, Jerusalem is a well-built city. Its seamless walls cannot be breached. It was up on a hill. And safety was a big issue in those days. Most people in the US live in pretty secure places, and you don't worry too much about security. I know that's not true of everybody, but in those days, the city could be attacked at any time. And being up on top of a hill where Jerusalem and the temple are set had advantages. You could see way out if you were being attacked. And then he says, the beauty is unmatched. The beauty of the city, the beauty of the temple that they were going to was just absolute. Continues to say, all the tribes of Israel, the Lord's people, make their pilgrimage there. So here's the other thing that was good about those festivals. You knew everybody would be there. It's one of those places where you knew the party was going to be. And it was required of you. It was the happening place. This was a very, very communal culture. And it was wonderful to be in those places. Continues verse 4, they come to give thanks to the name of the Lord, as the law requires of Israel. So God himself was dwelling there, or at least the representation of the temple was, this is the place where we go to worship the Lord, who is transcendent, who is all over the earth. And in those days, the most important part of a nation, of a kingdom, that's where you went for worship. And in many places, there'd be idols. So there's all these aspects. We are triangulating here. What's so good about Jerusalem? It was where the Lord was represented in the temple. Moreover, in verse 5, here stand the thrones where judgment is given, the thrones of the dynasty of David. Our history is there. When you go to Jerusalem, you are living in the history of the Israelites. David was the one that received the promise that his kingdom would last forever. So in other words, this was a big deal, that they were going there. And so back to Psalm 121, what the psalmist is asking is, should we then bow down and worship this amazing experience? And no surprise, the answer is no. Do not worship the place. The rest of the psalm, I believe, is telling us, think of the bigger picture. And notice that Psalm 121 comes before Psalm 122 that praises Jerusalem. Let's get the right perspective of this place. Focus not on the place, not on the experience, but rather the force behind the place and more. My salvation experience 28 years ago now, one day you'll be saying that, okay, 28 years ago, when I got saved. It passes really quickly. But it was triggered by a literal mountain experience. And I worked for an outdoor school and would spend endless time hiking mountains up on Mount Kenya, beautiful vistas, sunrises like you would never imagine. And one morning, I woke up and my entire group that was up there was just staring at the sunrise. And this was a secular group, but everybody was in tears. Everybody was in tears because there was no other way to respond to the beauty and awesomeness of that place. Now I know that that is what brought me back to the Lord, because I knew the only way I could resolve this thing that I was feeling was to connect my current experience with the eternal God who created this place. But that wasn't everybody's response, because the school I worked for has a very high ethic for creation care. I dare say there is creation worship that happens there. And I think that that's missing the point. And worshiping the creature rather than the creator. Worshiping the experience rather than the creator of the experience. And so the call today is to go beyond the experience to the transcendent one, the one who envelopes all of those experiences and places that we hold valuable. Mark chapter 9 talks about Jesus taking one of his closest buddies amongst the disciples and taking them up on Mount Hermon. And there, it tells us, he was transfigured. He was in his human form, and just for a short moment, he gave a small, teensy-weensy glimpse of his glory. And he shone brighter than the sun. We're told not to look up at the sun directly, right? So I just cannot imagine how that would have looked like. Moreover, a bit of his transcendence was revealed as Moses and Elijah showed up, right? You know the story. And even more importantly, the Lord himself made his presence clear. What did Peter do? Peter was like, come on, let's, this is so good. Let's build some shelters for you and for Elijah and for Moses and for me so that I can stay here for a long, long period. And, I've read in all the different translations of the Bible, I didn't see how Jesus responded to that because it was ridiculous. It was a temporary experience. And soon after that, they had to go down and live out life. They needed to go back down and be living daily drudgery. And actually, when they went down, the first thing they encountered was failure. Failure to expel a demon from a young boy. And that is what we are called to do, is to really look at those experiences as experiences that inform us about transcendence. To recognize those mountaintop experiences in view of the bigger picture. And that is important because it helps us to hold the temporary experience in tension with eternity. The temporary experience then makes more sense. Do you hear me? You can press in and live fully into it because it is not it. There's no need to get disillusioned because it will come to an end. Going back to your temporary experience, it may be right here, being here at Wheaton, like I said. It might even be bigger. It might be being young. I know being young is a big deal here. It is temporary. Press into it. Press into it. It may be, I dare say, being an American or whichever nation you come from. I am proudly Kenyan. But even that is temporary. We live more fully into these experiences when we recognize God's transcendence. We move from what the Bible calls chronos, which is chronological time. And when we live in chronological time, we're looking at the time like I am right now because I'm an African with a mic, which is dangerous. All right? But we move from time that runs out to time in the sense of kairos. Kairos as time is opportunity. It's living fully into it. To give the Israelites a better picture and to give us a better picture of what that transcendence looks like, the rest of Psalm 121 goes. He will not let you stumble. The one who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, who watches over Israel never slumbers or sleeps. Let's focus on him. He'll protect the Israelites on the treacherous journey as they're going up. Jerusalem is walled, but on the way there are many, many dangers. So let's focus on that and believe that he'll take care of us. He'll protect us in our limitations, in our temporariness. Trust in the one who has no human limitations in his transcendence. His promises to protect you and to be with you are yes and amen in Christ Jesus. Continues in verse 5, the Lord himself watches over you. The Lord stands beside you as your protective shade. As I think of shade in terms of space, I think of somebody who's right here. I can feel their shade. I can feel his heat. It is an intimate God who is with you, right there with you. He keeps you from all harm because he's with you. And then the sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord keeps you from all harm and watches over your life. At that time, the biggest, the most celestial thing that people could imagine were the sun and moon. And in the Mesopotamian cultures, those were feared in the same measure as they were held in awe. Many diseases were said to be caused by the moon or the celestial beings. And the Lord protects you even from that. He's bigger than that. And I don't know what today those, the celestial beings that we cannot imagine, they're beyond our imagination are. In this day and age, it could just be discovering new spaces in space, out in space. And we also marvel in the nanosphere of the tiniest, and we keep going smaller and smaller and smaller. And we even are afraid of things that we cannot see. The Lord protects you from all of those. The Lord keeps watch over you as you come and you go, both now and forevermore. I love these. As you come and you go. As you come to those temporary places, those temporary experiences, and as you leave them. There's an expectation that you're going to come and you are going to leave. Press into the present temporariness well. Be okay with the dynamic tension of being there for a short period in view of eternity. I know I am fully Kenyan, and I am going back to my country when the Lord calls me to. I know that I live a temporary life, and the Lord will call me when he wills. I can live in fear of when will that be, or how will I exist in the present. But only when I embrace the reality that God calls me to this being the Kairos moment. Only then can I live in that reality of transcendence. I think this is what the great teacher in Ecclesiastes, pronouncing my name many times over is like a Kenyan pronouncing Ecclesiastes many times over. In chapter 3, it talks about times and seasons, talking about Chronos and Kairos at the same time. And he says this in verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of man, in your heart, in my heart. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. As you read this psalm, may you just catch a bigger vision of what God calls you to here at Wheaton or wherever else you are in temporariness, for now and evermore. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.